first, Caroline, if it's okay, I'm going to come back to you.
Sure.
So I'd love just to dig a bit more into the context in which this was made in terms of Arzner being such a pioneer of her time. So you touched on the fact that Arzner was the only woman really to sort of break through into like the talkies, and that there were actually far more women directing in the silent period than there were for years to come afterwards. And I wonder if we could just dig into a bit of the context as to why you think that was.
Why all the women left, or why they were pushed out?
Why they were pushed. Let's assume why they were pushed. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning of film, right? So in its very early days, it's this totally new medium, and everyone's having a go. And the film industry in America started off in New York, and made its way to Hollywood because of like patents. Like they were trying to run away from Thomas Edison, who had patents for all cameras and stuff, and also because of the weather was so much better there. And women started moving to LA too, and there was some reasons for that. One was California had a really early passage of women's suffrage. They also was one of the first states to have a minimum wage for women, so that was attractive for them. And then also the opportunities that were available through this new medium. So I don't know if anyone saw the V&A's exhibition, the Diva exhibition at the V&A a few weeks ago. Not a few weeks ago, maybe it finished a few weeks ago. They had a city plan for Los Angeles when they were building it, and they were originally going to build it in the shape of an hourglass woman's figure. So that gives you a sense of the influence that women had in California at the time. So women were the prime targets of film, and they were also making it in lots of numbers. Sorry, 1 second. So Adela Rogers St. John's, who was a gossip columnist at the time, said that Hollywood was a matriarchy. And so, yeah, they were attracted to it because there was no rules and regulations and they could all have a go. And Hollywood hadn't been like consolidated yet. So, and you know, everything divided up by gender roles. So women could really do anything because it was so new. One of the reasons why they all left was Hollywood was in competition with Europe before the First World War. Europe was actually the dominant film industry. But obviously then the war happened and Europe gets decimated. So Hollywood has this opportunity to grow and to really, you know, take control of the industry. And so when it does that, that's when you start seeing the studio system form and what we come to know as like MGM, Warner Brothers, you know, the big 5 studios and the little 3. And so when it gets to be like that, women are pushed out because it becomes corporate and it becomes a business, and they're not able to engage in the business side. They're also not able to engage in the practical side too, because then it just becomes a man's job. There was also a lot of shifts in the cultural norms post-World War, so that also pushed them out. You know, more traditional gender roles. Women were expected to focus on domestic duties. There's also the method of vertical integration, which was studios. The studio system started to form about 1915, and then it was fully in place by, you know, the early 1920s. And so they controlled everything through this process called vertical integration. So they made the films, they marketed, they distributed them, and they even showed them in their own cinemas. So, and women had no part in that. So they would have had, there was plenty of women before this who had their own production companies. And I can probably just name a couple for you. Alice Guy Blaché, if anyone's heard of her. She was the first woman to direct a film and also the first woman to own her own production studio, which was called Solax. And Solax was the biggest production company pre-Hollywood. The reason why that went into decline is because other places came up and took control and took a lot of the power. But there was also censorship. So censorship came in. It's always been around in some form, but censorship really restricted women on what they could show. You know, they deemed what was acceptable and what was unacceptable, and obviously independent women and women's stories in the way that we've seen them were really unacceptable. So there's a lot of factors why they were pushed out. Like, it's obvious why they were so involved in the beginning, because, like I say, there were so many opportunities, but then those opportunities just shrank and shrank and shrank. And Arzner entered the industry in 1919 when a lot of the women had already left. And her position is unique because she started at the bottom. You know, she was cutting and she was typing. She worked her way up. And she made herself really invaluable to them. So that's why. And also the fact that she was a lesbian. There's something to be said about the fact that she didn't have a husband at home who, wanted to not control her or anything, but, and she wasn't going to have kids. So there was a lot of factors in her life that made her unique and allowed her to endure throughout. But I think that it's actually really incredible, because when I think about the beginnings of the film industry and the women's roles in it, I'm always reminded of that Ginger Rogers quote. You know, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels. And these women were taking part in the film industry and making movies and making really amazing, important movies, but they were doing it without bank accounts, without the right to vote, without the ability to engage fully with society as like a fully formed human. So there was that in itself was a restriction, and it's like they were only going to have a certain amount of time before patriarchy locked in and was like, no. Unfortunately,
yeah, thank you. And it's just incredible. I mean, as you said at the beginning, it's just incredible that she was so prolific. Did you say 20 films?
Yeah, 20 films, some that she directed and co-directed. So she was actually brought on to finish some films for a few people. And ironically, her last film, she contracted pneumonia. And so another director had to come in and finish hers, yes. But 20 films, which is a lot. I mean, if you compare it to, like I say, she's the most prolific Hollywood director. The only woman who comes close is, there's Amy Heckerling, who's done like 8. Who did I say before, who won the Best Actress Oscar? Yeah, she's done 10. Even, all the way down to Greta Gerwig, she's only done 4. But if you look before Arzner in the silent era, so people like Alice Guy Blaché made over 600 films. She also made the first fictional narrative. She was experimenting with sound, colours, special effects, even interracial casting. She made a film called A Fool and His Money in 1912, which was probably the first film to feature an all African-American cast. She mentored a woman called Lois Weber, who also made hundreds of films. So, the women before Dorothy were making hundreds and hundreds, then Dorothy made 20, and now they're making like 10 if they're very lucky. It has been a very sharp decline.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, these kind of waves, isn't it? So, I mean, at the moment, about 26% of the films that reach our screens in the UK are directed by women, but it takes 80% of women 10 years to make their second feature. That wow. Gap between the first feature and second feature is huge for women because of, some of these same obstacles, same but different. But
yeah, it's very similar with Arzner too. She wasn't making films as prolifically as other male directors were, and if you follow her career, she's in the beginning, she's probably making 1 picture a year. And then as the years go by, that the gaps start to widen. This is because she went freelance quite early on in her career, so she could still retain a lot of that control. But if a film was a box office failure, then she was the one who really bore the brunt of that, and so she wouldn't, like, this was a failure. This lost RKO £400,000, and the critics, like, they weren't terrible about it, but they didn't really love it, although they did love Lucille Ball. Of course, everyone loved her. Everyone loves Lucy.
Yeah, I wanted to come on to Lucille Ball. Obviously this was quite a catapult for her career, as I understand it, and she, became a huge kind of comedy star, comedy actress in the 50s. And Mary, I wondered what you thought of, like, her
oh my god, I loved
and
it.
your response to her
like every time she entered, she had a
Yeah.
new fur. Like, it was great. Like, I think that's the thing. So often with women in comedy, they're the straight man, especially with like sketch comedy. A lot of stuff, like, the woman was just like comes in to destroy the fun that the men are having. And the fact that she got all the best lines, all of them were really killer lines, and so you have a woman being the character part is so important, because she's the funniest person in that film. And if a male director had done that, or like it would be a man, like, and she would facilitate the comedy, but she was the source of the comedy, and I think that's so important. And I guess, like, and Judy had to be the straight man,
Yeah.
but she had to be the straight man to Lucille Ball.
Yeah.
But no, I loved it. Just killer eyebrows as well. I really liked her eyebrows.
Killer eyebrows, killer furs. And I'd love to pick up on that, like, incredible scene with Judy where she confronts the audience. So that scene where she's danced for them, they laugh, they heckle, and she confronts them. And she's basically saying, like, you think you're looking at me, like you're expecting me to take my clothes off, the 50 cents that you've paid or whatever, but don't you realize that we're laughing at you? And it's that kind of, it's almost like a breaking the fourth wall, right? And kind of interesting to be sort of confronted, I guess, as an audience member, because she's confronting the audience within the film. But I think you can't help but feel like confronted as an audience member watching the film. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about pairing it with burlesque, I think, which is all about kind of the gaze and that kind of like power dynamic between the performer and the audience. I wondered if either of you wanted to kind of pick up on that scene, really.
I think there's a power in like not showing, because you still with Bubble's performance, with Tiger Lily's performance, you're still not showing. That's a part of it supposed to titillate, and then you have like the dress swooping off, and the arm, and it's very flirtatious and seductive, but there's a deliberate not showing. Like, and I think that's something that female directors are really good at. Like, they're acknowledging that the female body is sexualized, but then they don't show it to you. Like if you like Jennifer's body, like it's Megan Fox, she's like a sex symbol, but you see parts of her, like, but you don't really see her. And I think there's so much power in kind of taking away what we expect to see. And so then to have that confrontation of her saying, this is not, I know that you want to sexualize me. I know that I'm here, not even really to be sexualized, to be in between the person being sexualized, but to just have that thrown back in your face that you're not going to be shown, that I think is really powerful.
Yeah, and also the fact that she decided to use Judy to castigate them. That was a very clear choice by Arzner, who did come on to the set and replace another director, and she, along with Tess, they rewrote the script and they chose where to focus. And I think that choosing Judy to talk back to the audience was a really interesting way to have more of an impact with it, because, you know, with Bubbles, if she would have been saying it to them, then they kind of would have expected it, you know. But with Judy, she's a sort of, because she's so straight and conservative, she's like a reflection of them, so it has more impact too. But what I love in that scene is that it's a woman who starts the applause, and it's the secretary as well. And so she, you know, she has a line in like a couple of scenes previous where they're talking about Judy, and one of the other dance instructors like, oh, did she does the gaiety dance, or, you know, says something, and then the secretary like chastises him, like, you know, a woman's got to make money or something, you know, something like that. It could very well be me in there, you know. So I really like that little link, and I really like the secretary. I would have liked to see her be developed a bit more, because she was great.
Yeah, because I guess, you know, the film sort of centers on this. It's not quite a rivalry, because what they want are two very different things, but I guess it's sort of tension between you know, these two women who sort of were once friends. But then I guess in the character of the secretary, who, as you say, stands to her feet and is the first to start applauding, we see a kind of between women, like, female sort of solidarity, don't we?
Yeah, women among women.
Yeah.
You know?
And is it just so you touched, Caroline, on the fact that so Arzner didn't start this film, somebody else. There was another director. He left at some point. I'm not sure when Arzner came in, and you said she did return to the script and sort of influence it, and kind of brought forward the characters of the women more, and maybe sort of decentered some of the men in the film. Maybe it'd be really interesting to think about what this film would have looked like if she hadn't have taken
exactly
over.
I don't know why the other director left. I think it may have been some like disagreements with the producer, but Dorothy was brought on, and she said when she was brought on set, she said no one had a clue what the script was about, so she decided it needs to be between the theme should be the art spirit versus the commercial go-getter. So I think she had some very clear ideas of what the themes were going to be, and she uses dance. Like, there's a focus on women's communities, and she often in her films uses dance to explore the dynamics of these communities, especially in relation to social class. And that's a huge influence from her partner Marion Morgan, who they met in the early days of silent film. Arzner often uses dance as a way to unify, but also to transgress. You know, and you've got the opposite ends of the spectrum with Judy and Bubbles. Burlesque and ballet, one is high art, one is low art. Burlesque is exploitation, ballet is, you know, artistic self-expression. But this contrast between the two women is actually an element of the bond between them, and it's not an obstacle. And I don't think either of them are really villainized for their opposing ambitions. But I do want to point out one big change that Arzner did when she came on set was she changed the character of Basilova from a man to a woman. So it was originally Basilov. And I think that's great, because that's like, okay, so you probably noticed she had, you know, she was butch, right? She had the slicked back hair and she had the suits on. So her style very much mimics Arzner's own. And so I think that's like Arzner placing herself in the film. If you do watch any of Arzner's other films, you know, you'll see big groups of women. Always look for the butch one. There's always one. She always puts them in there.
That sounds like a fun game to play, to be honest.
Spot the butch.
It's a drinking game.
Yeah, it's a very good drink every time you see someone. But if you'll notice, so when Basilova puts on her very cute little frilly hat, you know, and when she femmes it up, when she conforms, what happens? She gets run over. And I think that that's a lesson from Arzner.
Don't femme up.
Which probably also comes from her trauma from being placed in an all-girls private school to have the gay kicked out of her, you know. But you know what she's really doing with this film is critiquing the commodification of the female body and these, you know, expectations of femininity.
Yeah. I wonder if anybody's got anybody wants to share any kind of reflections on the film, got questions? Yeah, sorry, we had somebody right at the back.
Going
Oh, have we got a mic? Brilliant.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah, going back to the point, the scene where Judy kind of says to the audience, like, what are you doing? Tells them off. I thought that was really interesting because I used to work as a dancer like about 15 years ago, like exotic dancing. And it was very funny because these are the exact same conversations that the dancers would have. And that was 80 years ago. But honestly, I was like, this is exactly the kind of conversations that the girls would have backstage. And then another point was what you were saying. There was a point where I think it was when Judy was dropped home and there was the kiss, and then he was like, oh no, never see me again. And it was totally schizophrenic. And I think the majority of the women in the audience laughed, but not the men. And I think that rang very true with a lot of us, of like, basically that could be a classic fuckboy now, right? But so it was like, it's 80 years ago, but the themes are just as relevant. And I just thought that was really interesting to see how much it resonated. And also I wondered, the bits we were all laughing at, would an audience back then really have been laughing at those parts? Because like you said, would they have thought that women were funny?
Yeah, thank you. I was really hoping that we would get a perspective from a dancer. Thank you. Yeah, because it's such a key part of the film. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I think the love interest, if we can call him that character, was still very funny. Like, I know it would be odd to think about if people laugh, but he was quite comical, and the way that he's projected this idea of Judy being so virtuous onto her was so important, because yes, she's conservative, she's more reserved, especially in comparison to Bubbles, but it's just his projection of what she's supposed to be. And I think everyone can sort of tell. What's interesting, and what I wasn't expecting, because this is the first time I've seen this film, is that there isn't really like a solid love story. There's sort of the hints of one, which for a film of this time you would expect, like, oh no, someone's going to end up with someone else at the end. And so that might have maybe audiences at that time might have felt a little bit unsatisfied, but it's quite fun for us to watch. And with a modern look at it, he's so clearly not right for anyone. Like, he can't be right for anyone. Everyone should run. So I never took him that seriously. I'm like, I don't think it matters who he ends up with. He's kissing one person, he's getting married the next day. Like, he's so laughable.
Do you feel like the romance might have been more central, or either romance might have been more central in the film originally, and then it's sort of Arzner's come in and kind of made it more about the relationship between the two women? Or
no, 100%. Yes, yeah, definitely that would have been a creative choice that she made, and very intentional. And you know, this was a lot of the criticism that was thrown at her and her other films was because they weren't conventional love stories. She always subverted them, and if she couldn't subvert it, then she would, you know, foreground the female friendships that, you know, are developing instead. And I think that, yeah, that's why she got a lot of criticism for this film too, and in a lot of her films, because the men were considered weak because she didn't foreground them. It was always the women. So, and I like you said, I feel that I think women would have laughed at those jokes back in the day too, and I don't think the men would have laughed because they might not have got it. Because, you know, these themes really are timeless. So
maybe that's why it wasn't so critically well received at the time, because of course those critics would have been men.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Going back to that scene, I think it was quite interesting that Playboy, though, was actually the supporter when it came to it, and the sort of what was supposed to be the good guy, Adams, was actually the one that was quite creepy, really. So I think that was quite a twist, and that whole change of, you know, oh darling, I'll don't come anywhere near me, and then I'll see you tomorrow, sweetheart. It was very melodramatic. So it was part of, like, it was almost like melodrama that was brought into it. But yeah, I don't know. We were discussing whether people would have laughed. And I don't know whether maybe women, would they have laughed out loud like we did? Or is that more to do with how things have moved on now? You know, that we feel free enough to be able to go, oh, there he is. That stupid guy, you know. I think it was a bit of that, really. But he was actually the one that supported them all, wasn't he? Because he was the one at the very beginning that handed the hat round and said da-da-da. He was the one that went up to her and said, don't let these guys put you off. You know, you keep on going. So there was a bit of a twist there, I felt.
Yes.
I think that's such an interesting point that the person up front just made, and it makes me think maybe it's the ultimate kind of piss take is Ferdinand the Bull with the rose in his mouth, representing a very naive notion of male gallantry, while at the same time being completely drunk for the duration of the of the story. So just a thought there.
Yeah, they really hammered Ferdinand the Bull for a while. I didn't feel like that got resolved because I was like, oh, maybe it will go back to Eleanor, but no. That was weird. I thought that was odd.
I just had the mic, so
Yes, go for it if you've got the mic, and then we'll bring it down here.
What do you think? I guess what do you think the commentary is on the female relationships between each other? Because actually, I think Bubbles doesn't really have much in it for the person the female friendship that she has the closest to her. So everything she does is for personal gain. So she says, "Here's this job. It's $25 or whatever." But actually, it's just so she's the person who gets mocked, and she takes her man. There's so much thing that she does for personal gain that isn't very caring. So I don't know if there was any commentary you had on female relationships in it.
I feel like it's like a warped sense of loyalty. Like, even though she's offering her what is a horrible job, it is still a job, and she does need a job. And it's like that sort of, I don't know, when there are crabs in the barrel type of thing, and she can't, you can't let one escape. You have to pull them down unless Bubbles is the one that escapes. And so when she finds out that the guy is rich, she's like, okay, I can. It's always herself first. But if she was completely selfish, she wouldn't talk to her old friends, I think, or wouldn't like get them job opportunities. I think there's something about it's like. Maybe something about womanhood where it's like you know that you're competing with each other, but if there's danger, you'll be supportive. Like, I think that's like a very simplistic way of looking at things, but I think she has like a twisted sense of loyalty.
Just to say, in projection of Bubbles.
Yeah, she did, yeah.
You know, we all on levels of where we are at any time in our life. And what we have had in our as we've grown. So I just want to, I completely agree, but just remember that moment. Just don't tell anyone. And then there was the landlady taking it, going, I won't. I'm going to get a double bubble. Which is quite a cute thing there.
She's harder. She's harder than the rest of them. I think she has to be harder. But they're soft, and so she has to be hard, and so she'll do the hard work, and she'll make some of the ruthless decisions, and sometimes those decisions will like affect the feelings of her friends. But I think Bubbles stopped caring about feelings a long time ago because she had to, and it's almost like a privilege that Judy's still allowed to be soft and and reserved and be the virtuous one, but Bubbles had to harden like a long time ago, and she's a better dancer for it. So.
Hi, I just like to pick up on the themes that was running through the film, and I really liked how it ended in the court because the court scene itself was like a farce. But picking up on the Irishness, and of course I have to pick up on that. I just thought it was very interesting how they didn't make her a drunk Irish. They made her a feisty Irish. And I'd love to have, been teleported back to see how the audience reacted to that, and how, did she win in the end, even though she just spent a night in jail, and did she win because she was feisty? Did she win because she told her truth? I just love how it ended, and I'm still in shock of how this got made. And my question really is, like, for that boldness of that time, what advice do you have for filmmakers now that have feisty, bold stories to tell? And how can we connect? Like, I'm trying to learn from, this wonderful, amazing filmmaker. So what advice maybe, or what do you think, to stay true to our own stories now, how that film was told? What advice would you have, or how could you maybe connect, advice for us to connect to what we watched tonight, if that makes any sense at all? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the point about the representation of her being Irish and her Irishness, I think, is really interesting. I love that sort of really brief dialogue between her and the judge, where where she's like, but you want me to tell the truth, right? She's like, as you say, she's speaking her truth to the point where he's kind of like, like, stop, like, you're getting yourself in trouble just by speaking her truth. But yeah, I mean, I think that's brilliant that, you're, kind of inspired by this as a kind of bold story. I mean, I don't even know how far to go with the whole, like, reclaim the frame in terms of, like, championing particularly women and marginalised gender filmmakers to tell their stories in the way that they want to tell them, because there's a kind of formula that comes with a kind of cis white hetero Western patriarchal way of filmmaking, that is really nice to see films like this breaking, and this is kind of training and mentoring and so on around this is absolutely what we do. But I guess finding those films that inspire you and trying to find how it is that those films get to make their breaks, and obviously learning from more recent sort of examples from this, but in terms of like who's commissioning and who's selling these films and which slots they're going on in broadcast and which distributors are picking them up, finding those like examples of films that really speak to you, that you think have that kind of boldness that you're looking for, and then trying to find from the credits like who in the industry is supporting these voices and approaching them would be that first port of call, I would say. Because there's some incredible debut films being made by women at the moment that are really, really bold. But as I said just earlier, it's that leap from first to second that's the moment is really, really hard.
I think what people really like to see is growth, and they like to see like your journey as well. So it's sort of like, okay, here's what I first made, and now here's how I've improved, and it attaches people to you. Because what I used to work in TV, and what is really important these days, it's so cliche, but it's like, it's authenticity, and that means kind of like, I think because we have access to like anyone you want these days, there's kind of got to be a little bit of like an opening up of the process and vulnerability and stuff, and just kind of being willing to show that this was my first try, I'm getting better, I'm one to watch. I think that's important, because it's really difficult for women, because you're supposed to be perfect first time round, and you don't get as many opportunities to play, or like you don't get as many second chances like that. So I don't fully know like what to do with that, but I think just showing growth and improvement and having people really look at you is important. That's something that I've noticed that is important.
Yes.
I was wondering what it's like to be making comedy now, and this film was so funny. Like, we were all hysterically laughing, and it's like so inspiring to see, and also kind of frustrating, because it reminds me, you know, in keeping with the title of this series, like, that women are funny and have always been funny. Yet why, however many years on, are we still kind of, to some extent, it feels like women are making comedy in a man's world. Like, still that we are seeing more female comedians, and that's amazing. But I'm just curious, do you feel like things are changing? Where do you feel like they're going? How can we continue to, like, build women's voices in comedy?
It's definitely improved. Like, I've done stand-up. I've committed to it now, but I did my first gig when I was 17, which was a while ago, and I was terrified, and I was the only woman on the lineup, and I didn't get to meet any other female comedians for a really long time, because you're usually the only one on the lineup. And what people have started doing is just creating their own nights. Like, I've started my own comedy night. I used to help out with this night called Fuck It Up, which is the Femmes of Colour comedy club. And so there's more autonomy, there's more than there's ever been, but it's about those next steps and the opportunities, because it's sort of like, well, what do we do when Catherine Ryan goes on holiday? Like, who's going to be like who's going to be on the panel shows? Because there's a whole group of comedians, who haven't quite had the experience that she's had to be able to live up to when they get put in that opportunity. And so the stakes are very high, and you do feel competitive with people around. Like, people are my friends and they're my colleagues, and they're also my competitors. And what's been really important for me is building community, because it took such a long time, because I didn't know any female comedians for a really long time. And then I just made a bit more effort to build that community. I think that in America, they're doing way better than us. There are way more opportunities in America. Like, there's still a glass ceiling there, but you can be rich when you hit it. Like, you can. And over here, it's not the same. And comedy is like a dying art form in terms of the TV world. There's less hours of it being produced. And so, like, I feel like I was saying to you earlier, like, I feel like I'm very bleak sounding about it. But we also live in an age where people have TikTok and the internet, and it's become a little bit more egalitarian to, like, find an audience and build a fan base. And it's not for everyone. It's not something I've figured out how to do yet. I love live. And so the transition from online to live is not for everyone. But I think building community is important. Having other people tell you what to do, like finding a mentor, is really important, because there's so much stuff you just don't know. Like, it's kind of like, you know, eventually the higher up you get in comedy, someone's going to tell you, okay, that guy's bad, don't do his night, or like, don't share a ride home with this person. Like, that's the sort of like knowledge that you're trying to find, as well as like the exciting opportunities. I don't want to put anyone off, but it's a male dominated industry. I feel like it's a little bit like the music industry, or like rapping. Like, that's what I feel like comedy and like rap is very similar, because there are a few women in it, but the women who are in it are really good. But you have to be tough. You have to have a thick skin. Sometimes stand up is kind of like, the microphone is phallic. Like, it's kind of there's something kind of masculine about stand up, or maybe my stand-up persona. It just depends. But every successful female comedian is a bitch, like, you know, like a go-getting bitch. I mean, like a bad bitch, because they had to be. And what happens is women maybe do it for 5 years and then they taper off. That seems to be the thing. And people don't tell them what they're doing wrong, or women are naturally quieter or more apologetic and don't like, we've been conditioned to like not take up space, and all stand-up is taking up space on stage. So in terms of, because I come from a more stand-up background, in terms of TV and writing, I think like showing your process is important. I think they're not really waiting for opportunities because there aren't that many, and like loads of just like grassroots. If you have a short film, try and get some funding for it, do a GoFundMe, film it on a phone, and just have something to show people, and then have more stuff to show people. It's a content mine, and it doesn't sound like the most fun thing in the world to do, but like there's so many great female comedians who just need to be given more opportunity. But if the opportunity isn't there, then you have to kind of create one. I don't know if if that was encouraging.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm loud. I can just be loud. So with what you were saying about like authenticity and just getting in there. So like I'm a freelance journalist. Thank you. And I went freelance because I didn't want to have like my words controlled. But now I make absolutely fucking no money. So if you're, authenticity, it is what sells. I think it's important. But then what happens if someone just wants you to like lift your skirt up to the world? And do you know what I mean? They just like take your story and they turn it into something that it isn't. And then you're like, well, at least it got made, or at least it got written. Like, where's the line,
It depends on your bills. Like, there's there's compromise. There will be compromises. Like, you definitely. I did my first and only stand-up TV appearance. Like when I was way too young to do it. It was right after the pandemic. Like no one had been gigging. I was not ready for it, and they edited my material, and I was like, what are you doing? And they edited it, and I suddenly felt like, oh my god, what's happened? Like, because normally I have so much control, and they cut out a punchline, which was so unnecessary. And that was a learning experience for me, because I realized that until it's like my special that I'm recording, I will have to end up giving up some of that control. But I spoke to my comedy mentor, and she said, next time in the transcript you say, if this is in, this has to be in. If this is in, this has to be in. It's just about learning. And yeah, I think compromising. I think there's obviously, there's like, oh, I want to have integrity for my art, but like, don't do that to the point that it's stupid. Like, this is London. Like,
I mean, that was quite interesting. Like, if you compare Lucille Ball's. Lucille has the balls. And that whole thing of what you were saying about the successful female comedians there are a bitch and they're going for it, which is because that's what it is like. That is the truth of it. And at the end of the movie, where I don't know whether you would have called Judy a snowflake, maybe, but when you cry, snowflake sort of thing, she says, oh, it could have been so much easier. And part of that was because she self-sabotaged herself, didn't she, in a way, because she didn't have the strength or the confidence to be really say, this is what I'm doing. So I think in terms of what you, Angela was asking, you've just got to go for it and have the balls. Even though you haven't got any,
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that you said, Mary, like translate over to film, definitely. In terms of the, I think as we've both said, in terms of finding your community, but finding a mentor, you said, I would say translates to, women wanting to get into film. And the other point that you made about, compromise comes in anything that you do, but maybe really, really taking the time to think about what it is that you're not willing to compromise on, where is it that you draw the line on the things that are really, really important to you?
And just to add, I also think that the strength of Judy came also by standing for what she believed in, and probably she got her tough skin also through that, because also taking all these punches and being so honest and loyal as a friend, even though your friend is not making you feel that nice, that is also strength, and that is also tough skin. And in the end, she gets to the high like thing. So you don't know that, do you? I think they.
You can assume. We will assume. We'll hope for the best for Judy.
And I think that's valuable as well, and that's a choice. And yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like in this film we're watching Judy develop the thick skin that Lucille Ball already has when we first come to the film, I guess. Yeah.
And they're just like on two different paths. Like they've decided they're different people, so they're having different journeys to what they want, and that is what the artist has to do. Like it's not always going to be smooth sailing. It's not always going to be flirting for a job. But yeah, it's all about choice, and especially like in the creative industry, like no one's journey is the same. So you do have that choice as well.
I'm so sorry, I'm being told that we need to wrap it up. But before we do, Caroline, was there just anything else at all that you wanted to add before I'm gonna?
Just go out and watch more Dorothy Arzner, please, and tell your friends about how amazing she is. That's all. That's all you need to do. Very simple. Actually, it's not that simple to find, though, to be honest.
Right. Oh, yeah, no, do tell us, how do we find more Dorothy Arzner?
Yeah, the Criterion channel, some streaming sites, some Russian ones. No. I don't think they're actually on BFI player, but some of the films are on DVD. And like Dance Girl Dance has been like digitally restored 4K restoration and everything. Because like I said, we only showed 14 films in the season, and that's because that's all that remains from Arzner's work.
Wow.
And I was able to watch all of them through streaming because I had no other choice. But you can probably find it on the Criterion channel. You can buy the DVDs. Check out the cinemas. Prince Charles Cinema is screening Merrily We Go to Hell, which is one of Arzner's films. It was the last film that she made at Paramount before she went freelance, and it was the biggest film of the year. And yet that's at a screening at the Prince Charles in July. And it's basically about this rich woman who marries this reporter, but he's an alcoholic. He's a philanderer too. And so she says, okay, let's have an open marriage. And he doesn't like that. So 1932 as well. So sometime in early July, watch it. It's good.
Ahead of its time. Brilliant. And I also just want to give a plug, obviously, for the rest of the season that Arafili has beautifully curated. It's called Women Aren't Funny. There's flyers on your way out. And obviously we've started with Dorothy Arzner, but I think in a couple of days we've got Mural Box, and then all the way through to contemporary films like Polite Society via Desiree Akhavan, who I'm like plugging this evening, channeling Desiree Akhavan. So yeah, a brilliant season. So please do show up for more of what's in store as part of Women Aren't Funny. So yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you everyone so much for being part of this conversation. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jeski. And thank you, Arafili. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another big round of applause for Mary O'Connell, Melanie Iredale, and Caroline Cassin.